No, but thank you. Thank you for whoever prepared that. Thank you for the catering. Thank you for everything. And just thank you. It's been a really incredible morning, hearing people talk and unread conversations myself in the break and hearing a lot more about the exciting work that's going on in Herefordshire, and for people taking photographs like paparazzi now, autographs soon. So we've got the EDI panel, always at every conference, a panel on EDI. Is this going to be different? I think it is, because we've got some fantastic speakers here that we're going to hear from, and I think we can, and I'm going to, ask some questions that we've discussed, I think will be really useful, because as we look at new technologies, new ways of work, we're looking at people going back into the workplace, people staying at home, all the kind of things that we're thinking about work and the impact of skills and all the things we've heard, including education. The kind of things we want to do here is to probe more deeply around this concept of EDI and how we can take things further. So I'm delighted that we've got here Elena Falcon. I'm really delighted to welcome Yasmin Ali and also Rebecca Tully here. On the screen we have beaming in Suzanne Brink. Thank you, Suzanne. And I'm also looking for,
Sarah is here.
Sarah Chandran as well. Hello everybody, what a fantastic group of people here. And when I was here this morning doing the keynote, and I talked about, so I'm going to start off with this question, and I'm going to all of you, but you could just, let me ask you first to set the scene, where you're working at the moment, and just something that you think is important about EDI that we need to think about. So if I can come to you first, Elena. Can you all hear us, by the way? Yeah, lots of thumbs up. That's really good.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for staying. We've lost a few people, but thank you for staying. I am working as Provost and Chief Academic Officer of an organization called Study Group, which is a pathway provider. I'll explain what that is later on, but it's an educational provider, and I know some of you because I was here a few years ago as part of the project. EDI, what does it mean to me? Well, as you said, and I agree completely, diversity is the cornerstone of any innovative transformational organization. However, we are not where we should be in terms of diversity, certainly not in terms of equality and inclusion. So my starting point is we do need diversity from a business point of view, from a just caring point of view, really. But I think that there is still a lot of work to be done, and it's still on the shoulders of the minority. And it is not the job of the minority to achieve that balance. It's everyone's job.
That's very good. Thank you for that. Yasmin, tell us about you and what you're doing, what you're working on, and what EDI means to you.
Yeah, sure. I'm Yasmin Ali, so I'm a project development manager for green hydrogen projects for a company called RWE, which is a big German energy company. I'm also a trustee for NMITE, so that's my link with this place. I studied engineering, and I wish I could have gone to somewhere like this, which is why I'm so interested in this place. I think I didn't really know about the shortage of women in engineering when I went into it, and I just feel like so many women, and I know diversity is a lot bigger than the lack of women in engineering, but I think women are missing out on this incredible career, and they rule it out so early. So I've spent many years trying to encourage other girls to go into engineering.
Thank you, Yasmin. And this is an amazing place. I just want to support you in that. Rebecca, tell us about you.
So I'm not an engineer, and I told my daughter where I was coming, and she had come, she goes to John Masefield, and she'd come to a day doing engineering stuff here. I mentioned John Masefield. Doing engineering stuff here, and I said, I'm going to this future of work thing. She said, you're not an engineer, why are you going there? But I guess the hat that I have on today, I am the founder director of an organisation called Kids Kitchen, and we make work for, we're fully part-time team, and national, I've got a national reach, and we make work for people who are primary carers predominantly. And so the perspective I have is the practicalities of making part-time work that has a huge impact, and how we can do that. And I guess that's, you know, we engineer that with our...
An engineer
That was
after
very
all,
good.
look at that. Suzanne, if I can come to you, if that's okay, Suzanne Brink.
Yes, of course. Hello, can you hear me well?
Yeah?
Okay, brilliant. Hi, yes, no, pleasure to be here. I'm so sorry not to be with you in person. So my lens to this, I work as a data and AI ethicist at a company called Kanos. We're a technology company. We have loads of engineers, and we deploy and create AI. But there are a lot of risks that come around AI, and that risks around inclusivity of technology. So my role is very much looking after that and considering the wider implications of what we're doing. But I also used to work in EDI before this, including in a company that was deploying AI in a recruitment setting. So lots of different lenses to this topic, and yeah, very happy to be here.
Thank you for joining us, Suzanne. And finally, come to Sarah, who we know from our work. Well, you were a student in the University of Reading when I was a member of staff, being very kind of knowledgeable, I hope, to you, but probably not. Sarah, tell us about you.
Yes, so I'm Sarah Chandran. My pronouns are she, they, and I'm the founder of Fresh and Fearless, which is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy. And yeah, my journey in this space started when I was at the University of Reading, when I became education officer and I found out about the Black and Asian minority ethnic attainment gap. And so I wanted to kind of launch an event to address the disparities that we see in education, where Black and brown students aren't achieving as high grades as white students, despite coming in with exact same grades. So obviously there's something happening during the course of their education that means that they're not reaching their full potential. So yeah, I've been running Fresh and Fearless for quite a number of years now, and absolutely loving it. And I've actually just launched a podcast called Out of the Office. So if anyone here is a fan of the US Office show, essentially, I thought a great case study for what not to do in the workplace is probably watching every episode of that TV series. So I bring on guests to kind of dissect what happens and how we can run more inclusive workplaces in the future.
Thank you, Sarah, and everybody as well for the introductions. If I could stay with you, Sarah, if I may. When I was doing the keynote, I talked about the Minister for Common Sense asking us to throw away rainbow lanyards and other kinds of aspects around EDI and other and I think Wes Streeting also, a shadow minister, also talked about that perhaps EDI is going a little too far, and should we pursue, if I may, woke nonsense, if I can talk about it that way. What you know, this is a difficult place for all of us if we're trying to promote something, when perhaps there's a little pushback. What are your thoughts on that, Sarah, particularly as we get, you know, in this climate of pushback?
I think we shouldn't overlook the power that organization and businesses have in terms of changing the landscape. I think we often think we're limited about what the political landscape is and what the leadership is saying in terms of, you know, our political parties. But I think in terms of culture change and societal change, we can create those safe spaces and actually do things within our power as leaders of organizations to really encourage a different trend and trying to kind of fight against this anti-woke agenda that we often see in the media, because I think the media is definitely vilifying the EDI industry and the people that work in this space a lot, but I don't think we should be reluctant to continue to strive and push against that narrative.
Thank you. Because I think one of the reasons, I mean, there may be several reasons why we're why we want to be anti-woke, but why people are anti-woke. And it could be, and I'll ask Yasmin and Rebecca this, if I may, come to you, Yasmin, first. It could be that EDI is that tick box exercise, which is why I kind of said, here we are at the EDI panel, because for people, we put this on, it feels tick boxy, and yet the data would suggest we've still got gender disparity, race disparity, not having inclusive of people with neurodiversity, all the kind of differences. What are your thoughts about this whole kind of tick box aspect of EDI?
I probably start with saying I'm an optimist, so I probably see things a bit differently. But I do think a lot of organisations have good intentions. They want to do the right thing, but they get caught up in the day-to-day and it falls behind and they just see it as too difficult. I wanted to give some examples maybe, because I think this could work if it's embedded within the processes of an organisation and in their culture. So I've worked at E.ON, which is another German company. I worked in BEIS, which is now DESNZ, one of the government departments, and now RWE. And I was really surprised when I joined government by some of the inclusive recruitment and employment practices that they had. So all of the job applications were anonymous, so you couldn't see who was applying, what gender they were, what their name was. All of the interview panels had to have at least, they were 3 people, at least 1 woman or 1 man, so that you had that kind of gender difference there. All of the jobs were advertised as part-time as well, so that I think that's such a big thing, to your point and the things that you do. So and they'll just make it work. And then the thing that impressed me most was they did job shares as well, and there were some really senior people in like deputy director or director positions who shared a job with someone else. And it worked, and I've said this to people in my current company, and it blows their mind. They're like, "No, that couldn't possibly work here." And I think, yeah, there's some organisations are a bit stuck, and you really have to show them this can be done, and try and get them past that. And to be fair to RWE, they've just brought in a new paternity leave policy, so men now get 3 months off. And one of my colleagues has just taken that, and he's come back to work and is probably feeling like women do when they come back to work after their maternity leave. So that's a real leveler of the playing field. But maybe just as one final point on what I saw at BEIS, it wasn't perfect. There were still issues, and one of the things that they missed, I think, was diversity and social mobility. So the way that they recruited, you can't see that the person who's applying went to Oxford or Cambridge, but they seem to get through at much higher rates than everybody else. So there was something not quite right there. But yeah.
Interesting. Rebecca, I was just going to ask you about this whole tick boxing, because it looks good, doesn't it, for an organisation to say we're following this, because they want the brand to be reputable.
I think it's. I think to go right back to when you first asked the question, there's something I think about people having an aversion to tick box exercises and acronyms, and not necessarily an aversion to EDI. That was one kind of random thought I had, is that sometimes people are kind of like, we need to get rid of this idea of tick boxing, but then actually deep down what they really want is equality. They wouldn't dream of thinking that they were working somewhere that didn't afford opportunities to everyone. They just, so I think sometimes that's the rhetoric sometimes is kind of against tick boxing, and then people go, oh, I can't bother, it's just a tick box, it won't do anything. And then on the other side of that, I think it's interesting what you said about, oh, it will never work here. I would love to understand why. I'm sitting here going, I don't understand why organisations don't see some of the things that would help everybody, like everybody, including the productivity of the organisation. So I don't quite understand where those sort of blocks are, because I think that actually people sometimes have an aversion to tick boxes and think there's no point doing this tick box because it won't change anything, when actually they could make changes that don't feel very woke at all and help everybody. And I'm not saying, that there aren't things that do need to be kind of done for other people, but you know what I mean? Because I think that doing things for one or two groups generally brings everybody up and gives us all kind of other opportunities. So I think the thing about but one thing I thought about social mobility that you said was about So our organisation, we've managed to, there are things that you just can't get around. You know, you do need governments to make good decisions. You can't just work in a, you know, we kind of need that as well. But there are ways of saying, no, we're going to forge a path. We're not going, you know, we're going to forge a path. But I feel like in forging our path of part-time, we have, I feel we'll come back to it, but we have, it's meant that there are other ways we're less able to be inclusive, simply because of kind of how we're doing things and the fact that there are some people that are in the system, the current system we've got, stuck to part-time, full-time working for various reasons, and often that's around kind of other people's ability to move socially and all of those kinds of things. So that's something that we want to work on next. There's so many things. It feels like you're kind of picking one thing out.
Thing you've got to do. Suzanne, if I can ask you similarly about this thing, but I want to ask you in the context of women, if I may, although there's a whole range of other things. And the reason I ask about women, because of your experience in tech, I worked briefly in a tech startup. I left because it was a really difficult experience, and because I found it such a difficult experience, and the other women did as well, that I thought, I wonder if this is just my experience. And then I started doing some research. I thought I'd do more, and I uncovered almost a hornet's nest of experience that women had in tech firms. That was, I don't want to underplay how bad it was. Let's just say very challenging. What do you think? Because so many tech firms saying, look, we're doing this thing for women in tech. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I have heard stories too. I think I'm quite lucky in that I haven't had too much first-hand experience of it. There's definitely a big sway towards, there's a big male representation in tech, right? We know that the numbers show us just overwhelmingly male. And you notice that. I think one of the things that's quite interesting from my seat is that I'm in an ethics role. And I'm often, so it's not uncommon for me to be the only woman in a virtual room or a room, but also the only ethicist in a room. And that brings sort of two things. So if I get certain reactions, it's almost difficult to see, you know, where to place it, because ethics comes with its own kind of preconceptions and things to convince people on. So I used to work in HR, and that was female dominated. And now I work in tech, and it's male dominated. And I think in both environments, I've seen good initiatives that help. Like in what we do quite well in my organization, we have a really strong mentorship program, and we have some really strong allies, male allies, who challenged me on certain things, the way I frame things for myself, to be more ambitious around things, for example, which has actually been really helpful. So those are good examples. But some more of the less helpful examples is that actually back to my HR days, what I used to see was a lot of many more women entering, relatively seen the workspace. But then when you look at the top, you have relatively many men. So that's a very visual way of not feeling like the progression's got to be easy, right? Which shouldn't be the case. So that's in a way almost something I find less striking in tech in some kind of twisted way. And I'm not quite playing into your scene setting there. I almost find it a little bit, I almost felt it more predominantly like a battle in the space where I saw men floating up more heavily into the role into the male spaces. But it might also be just a personal experience, being quite lucky at my current organization. I know it's not the same everywhere.
No, that's interesting. I'm going to ask you, Ellen, if I may, about the leadership side of things. And I'll just preface it before I ask about what the role of leadership should be. And I'll come to other as well. Because when I did the equity effect research at Henley Business School, which I talked about, 58% of those organisations that invested in race equity, those organisations that invested it had 58% higher revenue, which is amazing. And then everybody knows this. We kind of all know this. Invest in equity, diversity, things are good. The second question that we put in to leaders, are you going to address it? No, was the answer. It was bottom of the list of things they wanted to address. Knowing this data, and it was the lowest. And the kind of things that people were saying, it's not that they're kind of coming out saying, oh, I'm pro-racism or something. It was not knowing how to go ahead, feeling they might offend people, feeling they might alienate people, feeling that, you know, a whole bunch of stuff. So it felt so complex. They're not showing how to progress. So I wonder if you could sort of give us your thoughts on how we can get the role of leaders to start shaping, because it's got to come down to the leaders, hasn't it?
It does. And I mean, it's a powerful question, because sometimes you look at yourself. I look at myself, and I was talking to one of my friends, Bill, I don't know where you are, earlier, and when I came to Hereford to lead the creation of NMITE, there was an article in The Guardian that described me as the only Mexican gay engineer in Hereford who was going to start a university.
Oh my
that was, you remember, Blair, and you know, it was interesting because many people were mortified about how the headline had come out, and I wasn't. I actually said that. I never said I was the only one, though. But anyway, and it's interesting because I am blessed by being diverse. And having been in a position of leadership, which then follows that I can bring that leadership into an organization and a culture into an organization. Now, the problem is when you are a person whose diversity is less obvious, or I mean, everyone is diverse, first of all, but who's less diverse or less obviously diverse, and they feel that they have to take a step that is outside the norm. My view is that, I mean, you just have to scrap it all and say, is it a tick box exercise at first? Yes. Do I need to set targets? Yes. Does it matter? No. It really doesn't matter, because if you don't set yourself a pathway to a point, you are not going to get there. And do I bother about what people think? Well, no, because diversity matters for productivity, for the well-being of the staff, for social mobility, for everything. That doesn't mean that it's easy. And if I were to provide any advice to anyone, it would be, first of all, to try to understand your own biases first. So analyze yourself. What is it that is preventing you from taking the step? Because normally it's fear. And it is fear of what is going to be the perception of others. But you will surprise yourself. I did unconscious bias training when I was back in Sheffield. And I'm a mechanical engineer. My work environment has always been with men, mostly. And so somehow in my mind I thought, oh, I'll have a bias against men. But actually, don't tell anyone, even if you're listening across, my bias was against young people. And I'm an educator, for God's sake, of higher education. And I was mortified. And the way my bias manifests itself is that I go, oh, I'm sure I can help you. You know, I have more experience. Once you know that that's your bias, you can begin to say, let's learn together, let's do this. But if you don't understand yourself as a leader, how can you begin to move any policy, invest where is required, find the gap, and certainly make the changes that need to be made? So that would be my starting point and my initial reflection, but I'm not sure whether colleagues have...
No, that's really powerful. I was going to actually come to Sarah. And Sarah, because you're working with lots of organisations, leaders and things. Tell us what's going on from your experience of what leaders are thinking and the role of leaders. Are they resistant? Are they kind of, oh my God, I've got to do this? Or are they kind of thinking, well, just tell us the truth?
I think it's really hard to tell. There's diversity within how leaders see this particular position in this world. There are leaders that are doing it for tick box exercise just to look good and that kind of stuff. There's leaders that want to do it because morally it's the right thing to do. And then there's some leaders that are really resistant. You know, I've heard leaders that really push the narrative of, I'm just going to hire the best people for this role. I don't see why this DEI stuff is relevant. It's completely pointless. So it's a real spectrum of how leadership view DEI. In terms of, I guess, the role that leaders can play in terms of creating more equitable and inclusive workplaces for the future, I think, you know, we talked about this about data, and I think measuring what's happening with the organization is really valuable, because you can implement all these initiatives and programs and campaigns, but if you're not measuring the impact of it, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know if it's actually making things better or making it worse. So, you know, we talk about things like learning series or anonymized CVs. We talk about different language in our job adverts. But unless we're measuring the impact of those, then actually we don't know if, you know, actually it's decreasing diversity and actually implementing kind of the status quo. And I think the other thing that I see really promising in a lot of leaders that I've worked with that are really intentional about their work is shifting their language. I think there's this real resistance to, you know, adopting inclusive language, because I think people feel like, what's the true impact of that? You know, language is ever evolving. I'm never going to get it right, so I'm just going to say things how I know to say things. But our language informs our kind of world views and our belief systems. So when we use outdated language, or when we use language that may be biased in terms of gender or sexual orientation, it reinforces those underlying beliefs that we might not consciously think and want in our organizations, but unconsciously we're reinforcing that. And then that influences how we make decisions, whether it's in recruitment or who we promote or who we afford certain opportunities in the workplace. So leaders that are really conscious of their choices in terms of their words and behaviors really do help create a culture within their organization that truly values and implements diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you, Sarah. And just keeping with that theme, Rebecca, I'll come to you about leaders forward. Do you think, how brave does a leader need to be if they're going to start making changes, do you think?
I think one thing that came to me when just a minute ago was also, if leaders aren't, so culture change is, you know, is a slow thing that kind of involves quite a lot of plodding forward and keeping pushing. So I think that if that's not happening, then everybody kind of has a role as well. It is important to change a culture with an awful lot of different kind of ways of behaving, and to change your language if you're not the kind of the main decision maker in a situation is still really powerful. So it's every step is really powerful. And what did you say? You said how brave do people have to be? I think it really, really depends, because I think one of the things about changing cultures is, you know, you find your allies first and you change things. You know, you change things that you can first. You go for the low-hanging fruit, and then you move into the next thing, and you take it slowly. And these things have to be sort of taken on board gradually. I think it's actually the how and not the bravery. It's the how it gets done. Anything can be done, as long as it's done with the right process. So I would say that in terms of leadership, being a leader can really look like so many different things, and it's about how that kind of keeps being pushed. There's a lot of patience, I think, involved. And going back to kind of reasons why, I think also it's worth just being aware if you're not the main decision maker in a situation. I think that understanding that, a compassionate understanding that, why is this person railing against what I'm suggesting? What I'm suggesting is common sense, and the research says that 58% higher productivity will result.
Absolutely.
So why are they railing against it? Are they railing against it because they know more than me, or are they railing against it because actually they've got quite a lot of unconscious bias? Okay, so what am I going to do about that? Well, I'm not going to necessarily just go in all guns blazing at that moment, but it's like, okay, I'm going to understand that in all the aspects of work I'm working in, there is unconscious bias, and then I'm going to keep sort of pushing in that patient way. I think that there's something about how we understand that this is what it looks like, that if somebody isn't making that change, it might be for not a very good reason.
Yeah.
So that we keep pushing for the change. I think that's, so for us, it's also the very powerful thing when you have got leaders. So the entire of our organisation is kind of walking this walk. When you have got the leaders that are doing it, it's incredibly empowering for everybody else in the organisation, because they're basically looking at people that are doing what they could do as well.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask the same to both Yasmin and Stan, and then I'd like to open up. So if you've got some questions that you're sort of formulating, it'd be great to ask the panel that. Yasmin, at RWE, all these great things are happening. Somebody must have done something to decide this has got to happen, because going back to my research is that some of the leaders that kind of think, I'm going to do this, I get it wrong, I'm going to say BAME instead of BME, I'm going to say people of colour and not thing, and I'm prepared to get it wrong, but because I want to do the right thing. What happened at RWE to get this moving?
Good question, and I'm not 100% sure, so I've
Just
been
make
there for
it up.
about
Tell us
2
what you
years.
think.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think part of it, so some of the stuff they've done on getting more women into the workplace has been driven by the German government. I think there are some targets, and that seems to be pushing a lot of the work that they're doing in Germany, which is also filtered over to the UK. I'm not sure where the paternity leave thing came from, but I was very happy to hear that. Although I don't think it goes far enough. I think it should be equal, like it is in Norway and Denmark, and that really just puts everybody at that same level playing field.
Yeah, something's happened, and it could be government influence. And I think you have to push, otherwise it's harder to progress.
Yeah,
because we're trying to break up things. And the things I feel is that get judged if we to go on a particular way. And I think sometimes it's the fear of judgment. What will people think if I push forward this strategy as a leader or anything?
Yeah, I think we're too scared to talk to each other nowadays. I mean, you mentioned that headline, and everyone thought you were going to be mortified, but you know, we've maybe lost that ability to ask the questions that a child would ask, because we're scared to offend the person, and probably in most cases they'll be fine with it, as long as you're not asking in a mean and horrible way.
I think also, and Susanna, just appreciate your thoughts as well, sometimes to push things forward we do need to speak to people that we don't agree with, or we feel that we don't agree with, but we can get, I remember when Brexit happened, and I remember when Trump got elected, and I thought, I know nobody who's voted, but what is happening? How come all these people have not only voted, they're the majority for Brexit? And I thought, I'm obviously living in my own bubble. And AI obviously can exaggerate. There's concerns over that with elections coming in. What do you think about how leaders have to create more equitable work environments where we're pushed to hear other opinions?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'm inclined to bring this back to, if I may, for a moment, like the AI space that I work in, is sort of creating inclusive technology, which is its own little battle in a way.
Yeah.
Because you also have this scenario. So for me, there are quite a few parallels between the EDI work I used to do and the work I'm doing today, because in both scenarios, you're saying like, hey, I know you want one thing, but also consider this other thing that's important and in the long run is going to make you better, but maybe it's sort of not the thing you're focusing on right now. Getting people to sort of step back, think about the wider picture and the bigger good. In AI, it's interesting because everyone's mad for AI at the moment. I'm sure you've noticed, right? Like everyone wants AI. Everyone don't even know what for. We just want AI. Everyone wants AI. But along the way, we know that AI has quite a few fundamental risks, such as it's not very transparent. You need to make sure there's proper human oversight, and of course, a core one is this risk of bias, it becoming an unfair tool that can then exacerbate and institutionalize bias at scale, which is very risky. So my role is very much to come in and say, leaders to developers to like everyone, please let's make space for this, make budget for it as well. And it will slow you down a little bit to look after this side of things properly. And that's not always a nice message to bring. They're not always waiting for that. So it's an interesting kind of space to be in right now. We are seeing some levers that are helping us, such as that there's legislation around the corner now that is putting some teeth behind needing to do proper innovation with responsibility in mind. But there's also, whilst we're still waiting for that to become fully in effect, there's a sort of business case you need to bring along the way to the leaders, and that really goes down to having them understand I think it's much like Sarah said, some leaders will already naturally just want to do it right. Anyway, they understand it's the right thing to do. You may need to educate them a little on that being a thing here, but they'll be on board very quickly. But in other cases, you need to bring more of a business case, right? And actually explain like your reputational risk, the financial impact and so forth. If you get this wrong can be big. And so there's all of that. But then there's also very much, you were asking around talking to people who might disagree with you even. Don't know if I've had a lot of disagreement, but I've had some, we're not necessarily thinking about this naturally, discussions with the data scientists who then actually need to pull some of the levers in the development of AI so that we can make sure we have an inclusive product at the end of things. And there's quite a bit of just taking time and being patient and educating that comes with it. And there is actually in data ethics, maybe ironically, very often a checklist that we use that actually helps. So we have we call it a data ethics framework, right? But it's steps you take to consider as you're building an AI system, from looking at the representativeness of your data. Are you actually representing a wide variety of groups? Are you just having white males here in your data set, or you actually have a bigger scope of people that you want to build a system for? Have you assessed, you mentioned measurements, Sarah, have you properly assessed the fairness of the system? And that's not straightforward because there's over 20 different mathematical definitions of fairness, and some of them are mutually exclusive. So there's a bit of a discussion that goes around that too, to then assessing it and potentially bias mitigating. You can actually adjust algorithms to become more fair according to certain definitions. So there's a lot of just steps you can take at certain points of development. But there is a process around getting people up to speed on that, being willing to build that into their project timelines, into their budgets. But ironically, yes, in my space, checklists are actually helpful at this point. So the tick box exercise it could become, but I'd rather have them tick the box, to be honest, than not ticking the box at least in the short run, before we get their hearts aligned to the matter as well in some cases.
That makes sense. Better to tick the box than
not to tick the box.
But yeah,
exactly.
I agree. And you made a point, and I'll just put that to the audience, to everyone here, before we go to questions. You said we might need to slow down in order to do this process more effectively. But a lot of the things we've been hearing this morning is productivity, AI, it's going to increase by this. And that's an interesting way. Do we want to have, is that a trade-off potentially? No question. Invite people to come and ask this illustrious panel some questions. You have a question? We have an enormous mic.
Oh my God, it's humongous.
Looks like a lollipop.
I've never seen a mic of that.
I want to hold
It's
it.
impressive.
Heavy as well.
Is it heavy as well?
Sound like such a girl. I just wanted to make a comment on what Jasmine said.
Can you all hear at the back?
Sorry.
Yes.
So hold it in front of my face might help. Just about the thing about the applications, the anonymous applications, and yet the Oxbridge still gets in. And do you think it's a sort of confidence, ego sort of thing with applicants, going back to the AI written application forms in education, that they're coached and screened, and maybe non-Oxbridge education facilities maybe don't, I don't know what the word is, don't help them in quite the same way. And then also language and semantics, local accents, just and people being attracted to their own tribe, their own, like attracts like, and if you're not exposed to ethnic minorities or, neurodiverse people, whatever, then you're not familiar with it, and it just seems a little bit scary, you know. So in those respects, how do you sort of overcome those? Because I think that, like Rebecca said about the unconscious bias that we all have, you know, we can say we don't, but everybody's got unconscious biases due to their experiences or exposure to certain things.
Yeah, so I think in an attempt to make the application process fair, the government has just gone so far that it's become unfair in some respects. It's a very convoluted process. Someone really has to talk you through what's going on so that you understand how to apply. I think it's quite, it's easier for people who've done arts degrees because it's a lot of writing, so it also excludes people from technical backgrounds, in my opinion. And yes, I think there is probably more help and more guidance for people who go to those sorts of universities. I didn't, I got through somehow. But yeah, so that is an issue. And the accents thing, I think, was also probably an issue. And I do remember a lady from, I think she was from Newcastle, who did a talk for us about getting through the civil service career with that accent and how she felt. So there was awareness around that topic. And what they have now done is tried to decentralise outside of London. So there are now government offices all over the UK, and they're trying to fix that problem in that way. But I think, I don't know, I mean, I think it's hard, it's a difficult problem to solve, but maybe they can start to look at having the interview panels being even more diverse. And I think they did maybe try to bring in kind of somebody from an ethnic minority into the panels. I can't quite remember how that worked, but it puts a lot of pressure on that group who are already a minority to, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think you do have to be intentional. When you are in that process of seeking diversity, processes, even though they become more diverse and more inclusive, they'll be biased to whomever designed them, and there are many examples of that. But you do have to be incredibly intentional to have, to find the diversity you're looking for. Diverse panels, I mean, look at this panel. Why is it only women? And that's only because, and I bet it's because we are the people who tend to drive these agendas because we are interested, invested, in need of, and it shouldn't be this the case, but still is. Equally, when you are looking for diverse workforce or student population, et cetera, that intentionality of getting either diverse panels, diverse processes is of paramount importance, otherwise you'll end up with the same. But earlier on I said you need to know yourself. If you know your biases, you'll be able to start working against them. People don't do that, and organizations, there was a point where everyone was doing unconscious bias training, and then someone said, oh no, you shouldn't do that, or remove your rainbow lanyard, etc., etc.
Yeah.
You still have to be intentional.
I agree. And I say the professional services firms, EY, PwC, they really moved away from the Oxbridge model, and they did different things. And Sarah and I both at Reading University, and we had our first partner made who came from through care, who come from the care system and joined and not gone through university. It takes so much intentionality to change that for the better. There's a ton of hands up.
Can I just quickly add, just if that's okay?
Oh yes, please.
So when we're talking about inclusion, I think we can sometimes fall in the trap of trying to make people feel and make people feel included in the current systems and structures. So sometimes it's actually going straight back to the drawing board and saying, why do we have these types of recruitment? So, you know, are CVs really helpful? Are they adequate enough to actually assess someone's capability and skill set to do a role? is there something else that we could be doing to be more accommodating for different perspectives, for different skill sets, and to actually find the best person for a role? Because, you know, we've talked about this, a lot of those systems and structures have been built with a particular person in mind, which is typically a white man who's cis, who isn't neurodivergent, is neurotypical, maybe is non-disabled as well. So a lot of the things in terms of trying to diversify our workplaces or our organizations or institutions, we're trying to push people through a system that wasn't inherently built with them in mind. So naturally, no matter what type of anonymization and debiasing we do, it's inherently there, you know, in the structure. So actually, if anything, the structure's working just fine because the outcome is still the same. What we need to do is break down those systems and try something else and put something else in its place.
Well said, Sarah.
Okay, do you know what? I'm going to just add to that. Amazing, I totally agree, but I really want to add, it's also the idea that maybe if we're just continuing with the notion of complete and utter growth at all costs, that's also something that if it's not going to work to continue, you know, it doesn't work. What we do with, you know, EDI won't help us keep growing at all costs. Perhaps, yeah, there are a lot of systems that actually we're ploughing down a road that isn't helping anyway. So
I agree. Larry, you've got your hand up, and
yeah, it was not a question, but a thought and a response about intentionality that Elena was mentioning. And if you observe the speaker's profile of the program today, you'd see it's been intentionally designed to bring different voices, not just tokenistic diversity, but in terms of cognitive and fields and people's experience and backgrounds. And that's why not every conversation might make sense to everyone here today. The point that I wanted to make is about having diverse voices, and we did try to get non-female panelists on this panel, and there was a sense of fear when we approached our white male allies and colleagues that, oh, can I actually contribute? Maybe I shouldn't take up the space. Maybe I should pass the mic on for others that are doing more work. So I think this is more of an invitation for everyone, including who is at the center of the power and privilege circle when it comes to all different forms of diversity, and realize the power that you do hold in standing up and speaking and bringing these issues to the table. So I just wanted to mention that.
No,
Thank
I
you.
think that's really good. Mm-hmm. Really good. There's a question over here.
Sorry. If I can pick up on that theme, the concern I had at the language in the room, we talked about being brave and we talked about unconscious bias, and I confess to having experienced times when I wouldn't comment because of the expected reaction. And if I didn't know this lovely lady next to me, I'd have probably stepped back by now, because it's difficult for people like me to make a comment. It shouldn't be necessary to be brave, and there shouldn't be such a thing as unconscious bias. And what that reveals for me is a failure to recognise the circumstances. And if I can give you an example, I chair a charity which is one of 40 in the country. And we came under the microscope because our board of trustees did not have the recognised ethnic diversity. But if you looked at the stats for Herefordshire, which we serve, we were well in line with the ethnic diversity. And it's that sort of unconscious bias from the judges that causes quite a bit of the problem. And I think it manifests itself that the activists are the extremists, mostly, that get the publicity. And they put the bias into the system, and we should be prepared to resist that and do a bit more research before we criticise.
Good comment. Feedback from, I think, Elena, any online?
I understand the point, Frank. One of the, and you'll recognize, because Jesse Norman is here, one of the intentions of bringing this particular enterprise in Hereford was to bring diversity into the community. So whilst I recognize that the point you're making is absolutely right, how can you find diversity in the community that is not diverse? it is those activists who are bringing the voice and the intention into a community that will benefit from diversity. So I think personally I am of the view that when you start moving the barrier, that's when things begin to change. But there is activism and activism. So there was a point that you made earlier. The only way we are going to get in a position that is fruitful is by shaping it. So my view is the same. We have to shape it. And that only happens when you are intentional, perhaps activist.
I agree with you completely. It is about shaping it, and we've discussed this sort of thing before, but it shouldn't introduce fear into the system.
No.
That's the point.
No.
Becca, you're going to have a comment on that.
I think it's also about understanding Herefordshire as a county. I think I've only lived here for 7 years, and before I lived here, I grew up on the outskirts of London, and I lived in London, and I have spent 7 years learning about a rural county that has its own ways and history, and I don't think people take time to understand different areas of our beautiful country. And I think that there's often a tick box exercise that is put on rural England which doesn't understand where rural England is coming from. So there's lots of things that can be done, but I think you have to understand the place you're at first, and so that can't also be placed on people. So it all involves work, but it also it's who's doing the work. And if somebody has said, oh, I've worked this out, on aggregate for the whole of the country, X needs to happen, I think we probably know that often has a really bad effect on, you know, certain parts of rural England. I think that would be my...
No, thank you. There's another question or comment, I think.
Oh, can I just add quickly? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sorry.
Just in terms, hopefully I've understood and not misinterpreted the person who asked the question. I think sometimes we, in the diversity and equity and inclusion space, can fall in the trap of looking at things at such a surface level. So when we think about, okay, let me look at this room, is it diverse? And we are just looking at what's, you know, staring at us in the face. But there are two different types of diversity. There's inherent and acquired. So inherent is the things that you're born with, and acquired are things that you kind of, you know, experience through your lifetime. So where you go to study, the skill sets that you bring in, maybe the languages that you speak and your nationality, those things can change over time. So sometimes when we look at an organization or a board, on the surface, it might actually look diverse in terms of ethnicity, but when you actually look at the kind of, you know, the analogy of an iceberg, we're only looking at the sort of 10% of the iceberg. If we look at the 90% that we don't see, maybe actually everyone has very similar belief systems, maybe everyone has the same sexual orientation, gender identity, maybe, you know, certain privileges. And actually we need to, again, look at that data and interrogate a bit further in terms of, is this true diversity, or am I making an assumption based on how people present? So for example, as you know, we're talking about this being an all-women board, but actually I'm not just a woman, I'm pangender. So I sprinkle a little bit of gender diversity there for the board. So, you know, I am femme presenting, and people do assume that I am a woman, but there's more to me than just my gender identity. So I think that's the thing about assumptions and biases, is not falling into those traps. So just something to add there.
No, it's very good to add that. And there's a note at the back which you guys on the screen can't see, but there's also something there about, isn't this all very middle class around AI? So there's things around class and language that we talked about, and accent as well, so there's a lot of different aspects to your point. Do you want to make the last and bring this to the close?
Well, I'm not sure. So the final word. So thank you, Sarah, by the way, that I completely agreed with what you were saying there about that, you know, what we see isn't the whole picture of diversity, if you like. So I wanted to get back to this idea of fear. And I think we should be a little bit fearful. Because essentially the fear comes from either not understanding a situation or because of our past experiences. So if an organisation does feel fear, if the chair of a board does feel fear because actually they're being quizzed about something, well, maybe that's because something does need to be changed. Something does need to happen. It shows that you're not understanding what's going on. In fact, a lot of us, a lot of people from, the sort of minority groups, if you like, have felt fear for a long time. So I quite like the idea that maybe the majority group is feeling fear. So.
There we go. I think that's a fantastic thing to finish on before we go for tea and refreshments. I made all the cakes, by the way. Thank you so much, Elaine, Yasmin, Rebecca. Thank you, Sarah and Suzanne, joining us online. And thank you all for listening and contributing as well. Thank you. Tea.
That's all right. A pleasure.
It's been great. It's been really interesting discussion.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Thank you. Oh, they've got 5 minutes. Ooh, you can hear me.
Let's test the sound system.
You can hear me.
Thank you.
Just teeing up the running order.
Let's try it. The ideal, in terms of whether it's configurable in future things, is another event. These were switched off, that might be
That's it. That's it.
To talk about energy and some of the
Okay. Well, there is an overlap.
I'm sure.
Right. Is it mainly AI? Yeah. Energy is a bigger change
It's
than.
been AI in the context of the effect on workplaces, not so much about the skills people seem to use.
Okay.
Sort of changing nature of that concept.
Right. And they're all local, are they? It's a very local audience.
Sort of regional audience.
Regional.
They're both muted.
Herefordshire.
Speakers.
So which one? So the one closest to them is muted. They're all unmuted. Ah, I got you. Got you. So let's. Yeah, if I push the volume back to where it was, it's starting to feed back. So I think let's turn them off again.
Graveyard slot.
It's fine. You think they won't come back?
I'm sure.
Do work. I once chaired a meeting when I'd invited somebody really quite famous. And I was the total audience. He was very nice.
Previous life I used to run a book festival.
Okay.
The Guildford Book Festival at the time.
Sorry? They're definitely muted now. Okay. Let me just. Gentlemen, could I just have a quick hello for checking the sound?
Hello.
Hello? I think mine's working. Is that okay?
I think so.
Is that okay?
I think so.
Yep. Okay.
Trouble is, we've had to turn off these speakers because that's causing
All that loop.
feedback and just trying to push the sound.
Okay.
So don't need to worry about Zoom.
we ready? Okay, we'll make a start. Thank you all. Thank you all very much for coming back. That's the first thing from the tea break. It's a real pleasure to welcome Nick Butler to the conference today. Nick is a former special advisor to Gordon Brown, a specialist in the energy sector. We're going to talk about the energy sector in a bit more detail now. Nick's a visiting professor at King's College London, founding chair of their Policy Institute, a long-time employee of BP as well, so a real expert in the political and economic aspects of the transition to net zero. Nick, welcome to NMITE and thank you for coming today. We have half an hour to chat now, and in the programme it says it's a fireside chat, so I need you to be soothing and Rooseveltian when you answer. And the whole topic of discussion so far has been AI, so it's quite nice to talk about energy. If you feel you don't want to talk about AI at all, that's fine with me. But I suspect it might come up. We've had some fantastic speakers so far, and I don't want to put you under any pressure, but one of the ones earlier was Oprah Winfrey's life coach. So no pressure at all. Nick, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit more about the work that you do and what you have been doing.
Okay. Well, first of all, good afternoon, everybody. And it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'd like to start by congratulating you on everything you've created here. I think it's a great initiative. I talked to Gordon Brown about it, and he said, why can't we have one in Scotland? Because the same sort of skills are needed there that you are training people to have here. I'm an energy economist. I joined BP from university, stayed for 29 years, not quite intending to, but I did. And then went to work in government for Gordon Brown, part of the policy unit, which was fascinating. I'm a Labour supporter, and it was great to work right at the centre of government. You see how complicated it is, what a challenge it is to get decisions made and enacted. And you also see how important it is to have the right people doing it. This is not a party political broadcast. I'll leave that to Jesse when he concludes the day. I thought we'd talk about energy, which to me is at the beginning of an absolutely fundamental period of change, which people have not quite got hold of yet. I think people see climate change as a big global issue, problem, but it's actually also a very local issue, and it's going to change everybody's life. I looked at some of the figures, and you'll know them better than I do. So about 190,000 people living in Herefordshire, so 120,000 households, I think. Many thousands of businesses, schools, hospitals, offices, transport systems, waste disposal, agriculture, farms. They are all going to be changed by the energy transition, and it is only just beginning. Now, some people think it's woke. I think it's absolutely necessary. The speed of the different changes will vary, but I think it's fair to say that within 10 years, 15 years, our lives will be fundamentally different in terms of the way we use energy in all those aspects of life. It's just starting with electric vehicles. It's going to go on to how you heat your house. It's going to go on to the reconstruction, which is quite expensive, of the power grid, so that there will be more people actually producing power as well as just consuming it. They will be putting it back, selling it back into the grid. That's a very big change. Different forms of agricultural input and output, far more plant-based foods, but also much better management of waste, not just in the agriculture sector, but we waste about half of all the energy that's produced every day. I walk through the industrial estate because I parked in the wrong place. and it is an amazing example of, it looks very good. A lot of people doing a lot of work, but totally unconnected. And I think within 10 or 15 years, you'll have a totally connected energy system within an area like that. These are very big changes, and they all require skilled people. The sort of skilled students that you're educating. And a lot of it will be about electricity, because there has to be a big shift to electricity if we're going to get anywhere to reducing emissions. But it's also about engineering, rebuilding things, rebuilding all those factories around the corner, putting in systems where cars can get charged up, where their batteries can be charged. Actually making the batteries rather than just importing them from China. And all those skills and many more. There's the construction of the materials, there is the assembly and the design of the operation for those factories and for people's houses, and the servicing of them. Those will need skilled people. Some of them will be academic, that's fine, there's still a lot of research needed, but a lot of them will be real technical specialists. And I think these are the great jobs of the next generation. They will be needed here, but it's not just here. They will be needed across the country. One of the things in the energy transition is to open up again the nuclear sector. The nuclear companies tell me they don't have the staff because we haven't been training people in nuclear engineering for the last 40 years. They will be much needed right across this country. And then this is an international issue. You need to have people who can understand how this energy system helps to provide clean water, how it reaches to off the grid. So I chair a small business that does off-grid refrigeration, which keeps food and medicines cool for up to 4 days without being plugged in. All these things are needed. I think it is a great career. It's a job. It's back to a job for life. And that's why I'm delighted it's part of your agenda.
Nick, just give us a slightly more detailed skills audit. You've just described very briefly what the sector and the industries need. What's your assessment of what they've got and how big the gap is in the main areas that are driving the new transition?
I think the gap is getting wider as the transition gets going. It's barely begun yet, but it is beginning to get going. So you need people who can understand, just take energy storage, which is batteries, how you can build them, how you handle them when they've come to the end of their life, how you recycle the precious materials that are contained in them, but also quite dangerous materials. I think that's one area where there are all sorts of skills. And then there's the simple servicing of all this. This is a new system. Heat pumps that people talk about going into people's homes, they work most of the time, but not yet all the time. They will work, they'll get better as you get more of them, but they will need people there are only 2 heat pump service companies in the UK at the moment, which is a constraint on the whole business. So I think you need things like that. You need people who can design and then build and then link up a grid. We've had a grid for the last 80 years, which is pretty good, but it's now got to be changed pretty fundamentally. And all those skills, they're around engineering and particularly around electricity in one form or another. And I think whatever your students are interested in, they should start by getting their basic skills right and then be prepared to learn, because this is changing very quickly. Just as consumers, we're going to have to adapt. I think people working in the industry are going to have to adapt, and that's great. It means it's not a fixed job. It's a job where you can progress and learn more and more year by year.
So what's your view about how we as a nation prepare for this skills requirement? A lot of the conversations we've had today in the conference today has been about Herefordshire's skills need, and a lot of the skills foresighting going on across the country has been done locally. It's local skills improvement partnerships and things like that. How do we plan for a huge national transition like that, a big national infrastructure of skills requirement?
I think it's a good question. I think you do it at every level. I think it starts at school by encouraging people to do more science and engineering. I think it goes on through colleges, through universities like this, but also in business. I think if you look at, there are many thousands of businesses here. I think if you take even the existing technology, mainly based on fossil fuels, but just beginning to change, businesses are very inefficient in the way they use energy. Almost every business could save 10% of its costs if it had an energy manager actually looking. You ask businesses, they pay the bill, they don't really quite know how they're using the energy. And I think if you put all the people on that industrial estate together, added up what the energy they're using is, added up how much is wasted, looked at whether you could recycle some of it, which is entirely possible now, they'd all save money. So you do it at that level too. I think every business should be training its people, and this is, I think, a new role for universities and colleges to go out of the classroom and not just doing lectures, but actually go into the companies and help them. I think it should be a collaborative exercise. You and other people have the skills, they have the need. Putting them together is a way of making money, saving money for them, but also creating jobs and wealth.
So what would you change about the way universities work, the way training providers and colleges work to meet this skills gap?
I think there's a gap, and this is not about you. You're more on the right side of this than anybody else I know, that universities are ivory towers where you learn from books and lectures, and then you take it away, and then you start and go and have your life and use those skills perhaps. I think universities should be embedded in the community, in business, in society much more, listening to what I couldn't find on the web, and maybe Jesse can tell us that it does exist, I hope it does, a real energy audit of Herefordshire. Who uses what? Is it imported? I think it probably is. What could be produced here? Just looking at the system as a whole, and I think that's something that a university has the ability, the intellectual ability to do, put it together, and then it's a very valuable source of data and information. I think you can also, universities, colleges, even schools, should get in and look at what best practice is. Which of all the firms on that industrial estate do actually think about how they use energy and use it most efficiently? And what can they tell other people about that? This is not magic, it's engineering, but that's very important and can have a real impact.
We have a particular interest here at NMITE in the built environment, and we do a lot of work in the built environment. We run it all from this building here. What's your view about the contribution that built environment professionals can make for this energy transition? What kind of changes in approach might they need to be thinking about?
I think they're absolutely essential because so much energy is used in buildings. This is quite a modern building. I think it's still about 10 degrees too hot. The lighting does not need to be on. So it's all
Sorry,
about...
it does for the camera.
Who needs light on
You've got a
camera?
window behind you, you need the light in front of you.
We wouldn't ever see
you know, this is not a television show.
It is actually, it's a YouTube show.
I think we're right, but well, I think there's technology now that allows you to adjust the lighting without putting the lights on through advanced cameras. and that's another technology that's very interesting. So I think, where was I? Before I was, would you like to come up and... Well then, okay, yeah. But
Sophie ran the project.
Now, you can then, but I think it's very interesting, is how you use materials. So bricks and glass and so on now, you're beginning to get to the point where they can absorb and release heat according to thermostats. I think to have thermostats in many buildings would be a great advance and would enable you to manage. This is where you come back to AI and information gathering and data. My son-in-law is just setting up a data management business for small and medium-sized companies, and it's very interesting. They don't really know the data on lots of things, including the energy they use. You can save money by that, but also you can actually understand how you can invest to make the whole thing, the whole system that you're part of, better than it is at the moment.
Thank you. We grapple a lot, those of us who run these educational providers in the region, with developing a curriculum that's fit for purpose for the national priorities and for our businesses' employment needs. What's your view about the degree to which industry should be informing the curriculum that educational providers like us do, and how much role should they play in that?
I think you should experiment by going out to a dozen businesses around here on an area like energy, but it doesn't have to be limited to energy, and understanding how they work, what their inputs are, what their outputs are, what the waste is, and work with them and help them. And by doing projects, I mean, those are the ideal dissertation topics. People learn how the real world works, and I think that helps their academic understanding of what you're teaching. So I think the two absolutely indispensably linked. They add to rather than detract the quality of the degrees that you're giving.
And we've talked earlier about the effect of AI displacing traditional jobs. We've talked a bit about fear and the fear of the future in the kind of future skills agenda that we've been talking about today. What would be your message to, gas boiler engineers who are fearing for the future of their jobs? And how should they engage with, embrace this energy transition?
I think you can, I'd take one word out of your definition there. They're boiler engineers. They don't have to be gas boiler engineers. The world is going to continue to need boilers, just as it's going to continue to need trains or cars of one sort or another. And I think it's a matter of separating out the core skill from the way that skill is applied through their life. And you never lose the core skill, you add to it. And you're right, AI will destroy a lot of old jobs. It will just put onto machines what now a lot of people in offices spend their time doing. That doesn't mean those people should be thrown away or devalued, but they will have to learn different things. And I think in the engineering world, they might have to learn a bit less about gas boilers and a bit more about other sorts of boilers and where the whole technology is going and what that could be positively used for. So they needn't be afraid. They just can't be rigid in whatever they're doing now.
So one more question from me, and we'll open it up to the audience. There's going to be a general election in the next few months. It's possible there'll be a change of government. What advice do you have for any incoming government about how to keep the energy transition going so that it has the best, most positive impact for the country and for people like us in Herefordshire?
I think the danger, and this is not a party political point, is that we go for these targets of net zero by 2030, 2035 in different sectors. And we do it without developing the industry in this country to supply what is needed, both in terms of equipment and skills. So at the moment we import almost every single battery that we use in your phone, in electric vehicles, and mostly from China. Totally unnecessary. It'll be hard to catch up with them, but we should have got ahead of it. We import almost all the wind turbines we use. And if we have an energy transition that is going to be built on imports, I don't think it'll last, because the balance of payments will go wrong, and there won't be the jobs that actually justify the costs of the energy transition to ordinary voters. So I think we have to get an industrial base to support the overall policy in the best way.
There's a sense that the energy transition has been slowed a bit intentionally by government. Do you think it will accelerate again?
I think the will is there. I think there are issues of investment. The scale of the investment needed is quite considerable, both by government, which doesn't have a lot of money at the moment, and by individual households or taxpayers. Someone is going to have to pay for these heat pumps. Someone is going to have to scrap their non-electric vehicle and buy an electric vehicle. None of these things are free, so it won't happen overnight. I think it will happen faster if we have an industrial base here that supports it and shows people why it's a gain, not just by cutting emissions, but actually to the economic life, the community life of the country.
Right, let's take questions from the audience. Frank, and then we'll come to you guys.
Absolutely, there is, that research is going on. There's an institution called the Faraday Institution, which I'm an advisor to, which is looking at both recycling, which is a key part of the future because the minerals that go into a lot of batteries are quite scarce and also rather concentrated in China and a few other countries. So the system won't be changed as it could be changed if we are dependent in that way. So people are looking at a whole range of alternative materials that could make up batteries, plus recycling, and plus changes in the technology of batteries so that the, let me get this right, the weight to power ratio is much better. Because batteries can be so large that they are unusable in some contexts. And so all that's, I mean, I think research is a key part of the overall transition agenda. It's not the whole of it, but that is one area where I think we are doing some research, and I hope we do more.
David.
Thank you very much, Nick. I think it's a very eye-opening and enlightening hearing your experience. And
hope it's working now. Oh, yes, it is. And I just want to ask, we're doing two things in NMITE. Obviously, training the engineers being the first part, as we should do, but we're also very committed to upskilling local skills, staff of engineering companies and the likes. But we do have a challenge in the sense that it's very difficult to do it without funding, obviously, as you might imagine. Small companies have that challenge in the sense that they can't usually commit very easily to upskilling their staff because of this challenge. So I was just thinking, you have experience, obviously, in government, experience in BP. Would you think that that kind of gap can be plugged better by government or by larger companies that may be able to afford it? And if so, if either of them or none of them, who should we be looking at, or how should we be going about this problem, basically?
I think you need all of those. I think the role of government is to set the clear direction of policy and hopefully a stable policy against which people will invest in these sort of companies that are needed. And we haven't had that. I hope we do get it. It's not a party point. This should be cross-party agenda. And then I think there should be investment incentives, so tax incentives for people to invest in low carbon. Large, small, medium-sized businesses. I'm just doing a paper on what could be done in the North Sea to manage a transition from what it is now, which is producing fossil fuels, to being a centre of low carbon energy supply, which I believe it could be. That needs government policy, it needs private money, and then it needs a supply chain to provide all the details, and it needs you to provide the skilled people to work at each level of that. I don't think it's impossible. I think now that we're past the debate on whether climate change is real or not, now we've got it to get into the real detail of delivery, which is not just 10-point plans written on the back of a fag packet. It is actually real details, sector by sector, area by area, what is being done, what can be done, and how do we do it.
One at the back, and then we'll come to the lady in front.
Thanks. I know the microphone's important. My wife's watching the live stream. She's the engineer in the family, so I'm here by proxy. But she tells me that she can't hear the questions unless we're holding the mic, so carry on, everyone. I'm not the engineer in the family, as I just alluded to, but I'm very comfortable in the company of engineers, being married to one. But my question is, how do we work together across disciplines to make some of this happen? Because if we leave it just to the engineers, it's not going to happen. If we leave it just to the politicians, it's not going to happen. If we leave it just to anyone, any thoughts on working in an interdisciplinary way to really get these things going over the line, make them happen?
Well, I agree with you. It won't be done by one skill alone or one part of society alone. I think if we collectively had a clear plan, it would be much clearer where everybody fitted into that. So in terms of, for a non-engineer, how you use energy, how you monitor it. I think data, the AI side, understanding how your house uses energy, how your business, whatever it is a key part of this. And if you're thinking overall in terms of we've got to get it better, it won't happen overnight, but I can do something. I think that's the right way to think about this.
Right, a question at the front.
So I just wanted to talk from a personal perspective. I'm net zero in my electricity at home, getting an electric car. I was just in the south of France a couple of weeks ago and flew into Nice airport, and all the car hires, electric car hire. And on an infrastructure basis, you imagine people flying into south of France, they're being pushed electric vehicles. Where I was staying in Menton in France, there were no more charging points. So, I mean, there comes a point where the system is going to break if there isn't enough. We've got an electric charging point just put in at home, which is great, and most people who've got an EV will have a charging point at home, so they're not reliant on, unless they're doing a really long distance, for example, having a charge away from home. But if hire cars and all that are being pushed to be EV, because that's what the manufacturers are being pushed towards because of quotas and things like that, then so how does that work, and at what point does
Oh, absolutely. Right. Good. Yeah. Well, you're right. I mean, all these aspects of it have to work in the same direction, and they're not doing at the moment. I mean, the investment in infrastructure in the UK is woefully inadequate and will now be a barrier to what is possible from just first-generation renewables like wind and solar. So each strand of this has to come together. It goes back to the last question. If we focus on producing more offshore wind power, which is good, but then at the moment the offshore wind farms can't find a market because they can't land the power onshore because the grid is not ready to receive it. So they're sitting there waiting. There's now a queue of wind farms in the North Sea waiting to be connected to the UK grid. We're not going to get a proper energy transition if that doesn't change.
Can I suggest it's 1:30? Can we just take a couple more now? Is that right? We've got Abigail, David at the back, and gentleman at the front. Do you mind just asking your questions after each other, and then we'll try and do it all in one go, if you could remember those. So, Abigail, do you want to go first? You might need to go down the mic.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, 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 hello. Hello, hello. Hello, hello.
Materials, and I think the potential here in Herefordshire is for that interdisciplinary thinking between education disciplines.
Absolutely. Let's just take David at the back, and then we'll get the gent at the front, and then we'll...
My point was about the infrastructure side, and you mentioned, Nick, at the start, that this estate, the Hereford Enterprise Zone, which I have some responsibility for, we want to try and move to having generating potential in it, but the national grid can't cope, and I think they're saying that it's potentially 7 to 10 years away until they can potentially do so. Is there anything that can be done to fast track that? You just mentioned a similar example in the North Sea.
Thank you. Final question here, and then we'll get a response if that's okay.
Could the government do something to incentivise the construction industry to install solar panels, almost mandatory in all new houses? I live in a small town where there's a couple of thousand houses going up, well-known international and national builders, and there's no solar panels going in at the same time. How could the government take steps to incentivise them? Maybe Section 106 money gets diverted. And a link to this question, could NMITE take a supporting role to skill their engineers and the students to help local builders do the tasks themselves as part of their education?
Well, okay, very briefly, I agree completely on the arts sector. I think there's all sorts of areas where people could come together to do things. I think of agriculture, which is a big user of energy, where if people understood what was possible, they, I think, would move more in a very constructive direction. On National Grid, I mean, they are disappointing on a lot of this. I think they should be given more direction from government. And on the question of the construction sector, and I think that is best solved. I mean, I wouldn't go all the way with where the Chinese are going. So the Chinese just impose standards and everybody has to obey them. So they're now requiring cities, the new cities they're building, to have entirely electric vehicles, nothing else. They happen to be produced in China, so that helps. I think you have to regulate with tightening regulation over a period of time so that these things become obligatory. Not instantly, that's too big a change. And I think if you did that, that would encourage the development of the skills to make it possible, and the supply chains to provide all the equipment that would then be needed. So it is progressive regulation, and I think that would be very constructive in many sectors. Some of it's there, but we need more if we're going to do this on any reasonable timescale.
Right, we're well over
No,
time,
sorry.
so I'm going to thank Nick Butler for that blissful AI-free half-hour conversation.
Sorry,
thank you.
it wasn't opera.
Well, it was very good. Thank you very much. Nick Butler, thank you.
Thank you for being attending. Thank you very much. Without further ado, we have Stuart Joseph and Nick from the audience will be also supporting Stuart with opportunities for businesses from NMITE UK, both financial and non-financial support available.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No?
Is there a way that I can see my slides here on this screen? You really don't need a title for my belly. Thank you very much. Hi everyone, my name's Stuart Ruston and I'm from Innovate UK. I'm going to talk a little bit about what that means in a moment. And it's just going to be a whistle-stop tour through the offer that Innovate UK has to UK industry, UK SMEs and UK PLC in essence. My role at Innovate UK is European Engagement Manager, so it'll become clear why I'm standing up here and not my colleague Nick, who's over there, Nick Housby, I need to introduce you to, because following what I say today, he's actually the person who'll be contacting, not me. Nick is the Senior Global Innovation Specialist. I don't know if you want to stand up, Nick, so they can see what you look like. So that's Nick Housby, and he is really the point of contact when it comes to the offer that Innovate UK has to businesses. I'm more kind of bespoke in a certain area around European funding, which, yes, the UK does have access to some European funding. I know that some of you might be surprised to hear that. But Innovate UK is the UK's innovation agency, supporting business-led innovations. So we're there at certain intervention points to support UK organisations in their research and development, helping them to scale up, helping them to find access to grant funding, not just European funding, but obviously there's UK funding as well, and the support team that are available to work with businesses. So you may all be familiar with what Innovate UK does, but if you're not, I'd recommend that you contact us and we can help your business scale up and grow, whether it's within the UK or internationally, globally. So these are the Innovate UK products and services. Because I'm being squeezed on time, I'm going to be rushing a little bit, so apologies for that. Hopefully the slides will be available to you all subsequent to this event. I don't know who you should be looking at, who's going to confirm that, but hopefully you'll be able to get hold of the slides after this event. So broadly, there's the non-cash support aspect, support available to UK organisations, and then there's a funding element. There's grants, there's lots of competitions that are open to UK companies, loans, investor partnerships where we get investors will be introduced to your organisation and your business, and you can pitch to them and potentially they might invest, and contracts that obviously we issue. I work in this area, which is a non-cash support, but hopefully leading to cash support. I work in this line here, Horizon Europe, which is the European funding that the UK has recently associated to that programme, having been out of it subsequent to Brexit. We then left the Horizon Europe, which is the framework programme of research and development. But now we're back in the Horizon Europe programme, we're kind of subscribing to it and paying into it. So obviously now that we're back in Horizon Europe, we want to make sure that the UK gets out at least what it puts in. And so that's my main role, is to boost the UK participation in that programme. But aside from my selfish needs to inspire our re-engagement in Horizon Europe, Innovate UK offers business support. So we have a business growth team, which you may have heard of as EDGE before. They're now called Business Growth. And I think that's the team that you're from, Nick. And they have lots of expertise within them to help your business scale up. Or if you are networked with other businesses, if you're from an organisation such as this one supports SMEs and supports industry, they can come out and talk to that network and promote the work and help those businesses scale up. And then aside from that, there's Business Connect, Innovate UK Business Connect, which used to be known as KTN. That's recently changed as well. And again, that's connecting innovators to new partners. So they hold events and webinars and try and get people to collaborate where appropriate. And also, you know, as part of my role, we work with them to develop collaborations with Europe and our European counterparts, and more globally out in the wider world, to help you find the right collaborators for your industry or for your business or for your project. So I'm from the global team, as it suggests from my job title, European Engagement Manager. We offer businesses support through the Global Business Innovation Programme, which you may have heard of as GBIT, the Incubator Programme, Global Explorers, and Innovate UK support for global growth. And often that involves us linking you up with the international market. So it might be through bilateral visits where we go and we take a cohort of businesses out to certain countries for you to promote your work and hopefully develop your business. And it might be that we invite cohorts over here to work with you to develop and collaborate and hopefully do some businesses there. And then there's the innovation element, and that's around supporting collaborative research and development programs, of which Horizon Europe is one. Allowing you to collaborate with international partners. We can hopefully find the right partner for you, which will we hope will lead to funding for your organisation to deliver on what it is, the research that you want to deliver on, but also help your business development internationally by working with European partners. So time constraints mean I'm not going to go through the Eureka programme, and it might not be entirely appropriate for this audience anyway. But what I am going to say is that I'm going to hopefully work with NMITE to come and do a larger session at some point in a future event, so we can really talk about what Innovate UK can offer in more detail rather than me just rushing through it. And then we can cover these individual programmes in a bit more detail. So there's a Eureka programme, which is around working with Europe. And then there's the Horizon Europe programme, which is what I represent. It's worth, I think, around about 93 billion euros in total. The UK associated to be part of it again. They signed the agreement in January. It was in September last year that they agreed that they will participate again. The UK used to get, prior to Brexit, the UK used to get 8 billion euros out of the programme. And I think we put in 6 billion, so we used to really do well out of Horizon Europe. Don't hold me to those figures, by the way, but that's kind of anecdotal, but that's the general understanding of where the UK was. So we want to try and get our participation rates up to certainly what they once were, if that's possible. It's harder now, because obviously there's a different perception of the UK within that European framework, in that European network, and we're not there anymore. We used to be in Brussels with Brussels offices, so we'd be getting out and networking. So it is harder to engage and get our participation rates up. But we know that Europe is open to working with us again. And also, Horizon Europe, although it's called Horizon Europe, it's a global programme. It isn't just about working with Europe and European partners. There are other countries, many other countries that are participating that allow us to work with them globally also. Horizon Europe is broken up in lots of different clusters and sectors and pillars. So for each of those clusters and pillars, there's what's called a national contact point. And I think the next slide might talk a bit more about what they do. So that's an individual who will support you if you're looking to engage in the Horizon Europe programme. You contact them and they will support you through the process. They'll advise as to whether your idea is something that is worth taking forward. They'll help you find partners where they can, because you have to have European partners or other international partners for the programme, and they'll just help with your application and help in turn to boost our participation in the programme. I can put you in touch with those NCPs, so hopefully my contact details will be available to you after this. Here are some QR codes. So there's a Horizon Europe hub, which tells you more about the Horizon Europe programme. That QR code there is around finding your UK NCP, so if you hover over that when you have these slides, hopefully on your screen, you'll be able to find the correct NCP in your particular sector. NCP being National Contact Point, not National Car Park. And then we currently, for any SMEs that are out there at the moment, we have a pump priming programme, easy for me to say, which is up to the value of about £6,000, allowing you to explore your collaboration with international partners. So if you follow that QR code, it'll explain more about that. But it's a part of our way of re-engaging with the Horizon Europe programme is some small amount of funding that allows you to develop that collaboration with European counterparts. So it's worth taking a look at that. And then the UK National Contact Points, they issue newsletters monthly, so I advise you to sign up to those and get more information about the opportunities out there under the Horizon Europe programme. So thank you, it's been very rushed, but hopefully we'll do a more spread out and more relaxed event in the future, so that'd be great. Thank you. And, you're applauding me now, but I'm saying any questions. So.
Any quick questions for Stuart? If not, we keep to engage both Horizon Europe and the business culture. We've all been running an innovation support program on management. Since there is one of the businesses in the program, so we want you to develop more strong links and relationships with businesses and what's out there. Watch out for more stuff coming through.
Thank you.
Next up, we have, I think, probably the smallest man in the room.
Hello. Yes, sir. But how long have we got, Harry? Okay, you do. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, Larry. And what a fantastic day this has been, and what an absolute delight it is to have a chance to kind of wind things up a little bit. And of course, I wouldn't be winding things up if I didn't start with some thanks. And I want to thank everyone who's been involved. Speakers have been fantastic, really learned a lot from them. You audience, dare I say it, haven't been too bad either. Thank you very much indeed to you guys. And most of all, Lahari, what a goddess. It would be invidious to mention any other member of the NMITE team, so I might forget someone, and it's been a team effort, as with everything we do, but you've been absolutely brilliant, and thank you for making this such a fantastic day, so congratulations. It's also particularly exciting to me to get another audience into this amazing building, an incredible resource for the county, and to have people get a chance to sense not just the kind of energy and the dynamism and the ideas that are coming through this building, but what this represents in terms of the values that we as a county can look forward to. You know, something about the future, something about sustainability, something about getting everyone together into a room, something about a kind of ease with the postmodern world, and something about learning and energy and personal capability. I'm going to touch on all of those things briefly, if I may. I was going to call out the students for their phenomenal achievements, but since they left in a phalanx at the end of James Newby's and Nick Butler's talk, I've understood that they've fallen squarely on the utility side of the scholarship utility equation, and I respect that. But it does mean I can't mention them and I can't pick up their individual projects and their characteristics, because those are phenomenal in their own right and absolutely worth your investigation. Let me just, if I may, give you a little provocation, because at the end of the day, one should have a little bit of yeast, you know, a little bit of paprika on the dish to give it a bit of savour, and I hope you'll allow me to engage you a bit. Now, you will know, if you know me, that I am an incredible bore on the history of Hereford. Hereford had a tradition in the sciences, in the exact sciences, in particular the use of the abacus, the use of the astrolabe, computational tables for astronomy in the 12th century, around the cathedral. That is before Oxford University got going. I just want to be clear about that, ladies and gentlemen. We're talking about the 1190s, and Oxford doesn't really get going until just about that time, and it doesn't really become a university. You can debate it in different ways until the early 13th century. Colleges come along later as well. Now, as a story I've never ceased to tell, 1209, there's a big dust up in Oxford. A bunch of scholars worried that they're going to get killed because someone's died, and they all decide to up sticks. And they go 90 miles east and set up what becomes the University of Cambridge. Now, they could have gone 90 miles west and set up a university in Hereford, but tragically that they didn't, and that is the gap that we are destined to fulfill. But at that time, and ever since, there has been an equivocation in the idea of a university. And it was touched on brilliantly earlier by young gentleman in the front, Frank Myers, when he picked up this point about the dialectic between utility and scholarship, between, as it were, turning out people who can deal with the world and make something of themselves out of it, and people, as it were, nurtured to a life of leisure in the ivory tower. That is a dialectic that goes back to ancient times, to Plato and Socrates against the sophists, the people who came in to give education and skills, dare I say it, to the sons of the wealthy. And that dialectic plays itself out throughout the Middle Ages and indeed into our modern conception of a research university. And I want to put it to you that it has in some respects been magnificent, but also in some respects disastrous. And let me just give you some ways in which it's been disastrous. First of all, we have a university sector that's vastly overextended and financially unsustainable in many parts of it because of its reliance on foreign students and the way in which the sector has developed. The second is because having gigantic universities, Bristol University, when I was growing up, was a university of 6,000 to 7,000 students. It now has 27,000 students in Bristol. A friend of mine, a daughter got into Bristol. They said, great news, your first year you'll be accommodated on our Newport campus. Okay, so you have gigantism in higher education. You have a situation in which those universities, because they have grown so much, have had to have not just national but international catchments. And they therefore have had the unexpected effect of sucking talent out of parts of the country that do not have a large city or a historic foundation in them. Now, Worcester was one of those places until it set up a university. And we can look around the country using the census statistics at places that are net generators of degrees, when you include the locals who have them, the locals who move in, and the locals who have them and move out. And we are, contrary to the Blairite ideal of a 50% of the population going to university, we are at 18% in Herefordshire, 18% in Herefordshire. Now, does that mean Herefordians are, as it were, 30% as talented as the kids who go to university elsewhere in the country, or as it were, 20% as talented as the, or 25% as talented as the kids who go to university in the southeast? The answer is absolutely not, under no circumstances. So what we're doing is something that's actually, if I may dare to say it, profoundly important. We are putting together the ethos, the energy, the drive, the focus, the cost structure, the care for the student experience of further education with the academic standards and expectations of higher ed and the desire to create a liberal sciences capable human being. The jointure of those two traditions I mentioned, of utility and the ivory tower, we are pulling them together into a single educational experience. And of course, it's not just an educational experience, it's a practical experience, because we make you do things if you're a student here. And we also make you do with clients, and people have ideas, and we deconstruct the problem set, so you have to do that progressively, and you can only work in teams or you get individually assessed. So all of those things give us the opportunity to create a small modular reactor, a small model of an outstanding teaching university of a kind that has existed and does exist in other countries, but has really never been seen in this country in the modern experience of the higher education sector. So that's what we're doing. And in particular, we're focusing on, although you wouldn't know it the way some of the microphones have been playing up, we're focusing on capability. Capability, in my view, is not just the ability to do stuff, it's the ability and the disposition. It's getting out there and saying, yes, I can change the world, and by the way, I can make this difference, and that's what I'm going to do. And if when you go out, you talk to some of our students, those MEng or BN students, and you talk about what their projects are, well, let me just tell you. So one of them at the moment is thinking about the build-up of plaques in the cardiovascular, in our arterial systems, as a problem in fluid dynamics, using computational fluid dynamics to think about that. Now, that's not unhelpful if you're in the petrochemical industry. Nick's left us, but many of his colleagues at BP would be thrilled to have someone who'd thought that deeply about those issues. Turbulence, swirl, back feeding of current, all that stuff. So that's one example. Another one is training data for AI models in autonomous vehicles. Another one is trying to create integrated sense perception for agricultural vehicles. I mean, it's an astounding array. These are kids who 3 years ago weren't even in higher education at all. So I just want to focus on why this is important. And I'm thrilled that we've got people from Innovate UK here. Thank you so much for coming. But this is the goal. This is what we're trying to do. We want these guys, I say guys, men, women, and all, to come out, to make a difference to the world, and to be queuing up for money from you guys and for venture capital money and for all of that energizing capital that they will need to translate their ideas and their personal drive, their entrepreneurial energy into real outcomes. A sentence more or two. If you take a helicopter view of where we are as a world, we have had a period of what people have called market states and a certain illusion of free trade, quite large at the beginning of the 20th century, reducing quite rapidly towards the end of the 20th century. We've had the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade with the World Trade Organization. We've had the idea of trade as being a kind of a game in which both sides win. We now are entering a world of the Inflation Reduction Act, enormous amounts of domestic spending. We've heard about the Chinese on electric vehicles, tariffs, import controls. We're moving towards a world in which we are much more a fortress state, or you might call a secure state, than a market state. And that's because we have challenges of food security, energy security, pandemic resilience, defense security, in a way that we had never anticipated post-1989 when the wall came down. What does that, those are forces for self-sufficiency, they're forces that in a world in which AI means that nothing is real, anything can be mimicked, which is where we're going to be in a couple of years' time, they are forces for the local, for being able to put your arm around someone, look them in the eye, and have a contact with them, because if they're on Zoom, you couldn't be sure you were talking to them. Okay. Local self-sufficiency capability, that is the recipe for the success of this institution, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you may be asking, in fact, I'm swept over by the inquiry coming from each of you, which is, how can I personally, having sat through this day, make a difference? And the answer is, just get out there and tell everyone. Because we've got a city out there, we'll be taking 70 or 80 students. In a very short period of time, we will be turning away students because our guys are getting such good jobs so quickly on the basis of such quality of work. There's absolutely no reason why this story should be confined to us. We should be telling everyone we know, we should be encouraging people in Herefordshire to line up to allow the next generation, their children and grandchildren, to sense the joy, the purpose, and above all, the educational and the career rewards of taking this local, inexpensive, and very high quality route. And I hope you will do that. I hope you will get up, ladies and gentlemen, come out here and become massive evangelists and apostles for the revolution that we're trying to spread. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Jesse. It's always very difficult to follow your acts anytime. But I'm here to wrap up, so if I mess it up, we'll go home anyways. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. We have the privilege of, I have the privilege, I must say, of announcing our raffle winner. And I thought you'd be excited. Somebody's won. And he is, I hope he's still here, he's Bob Lane. All right, okay. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Most
you very much.
unexpected.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers. So, I've never won one in my life, so one day it will get to me as well. And if you're like me, keep hoping. So we want to say thank you again to everyone who's made this event possible. We can't thank Lahari enough for leading the team here in NMITE and obviously colleagues. And every one of our speakers, can we just give them one round of applause to appreciate them? Whilst we've appreciated them, it would be good to remember everything that they've passed across. So many diverse kinds of messages here today, just talking about this very important agenda. So let's keep talking about those things. We've exchanged cards, we've known people. Let's keep the conversations going. And let's keep talking about NMITE. Whatever you do, remember this institution is here to serve you. And what we want to do is to make sure that we're making that impact in this space. So we want to say thank you to everyone as well, every guest that has come. It takes a lot of effort to turn up at events like this because of the so many things that compete for our time in this day and age. So whilst we've done that for the speakers, let's do the same for all our guests that have come from different places. Thank you very much for coming. And we want to say, please look out, keep looking out for future announcements that you've heard. The Innovate UK and a few other events will be coming up like this. Some will be more focused around your type of business and interests, and some will be general like this as well. But whatever it is, please feel free to keep engaging. And yes, we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a blessed day.
One last thing, if you can do the feedback for the day, please. Thank you.